The air shimmers with heat, though the night outside is cool. Flames dance beneath a monstrous sculpture, a beast of polished bronze, its surface glowing red at the seams. The form is majestic, almost divine, a bull with eyes that glint like molten suns. But what rises from within is no prayer, no hymn. It is the sound of a man's soul tearing itself apart, his screams forced through twisted pipes until they bellow like the roar of some unholy creature. The crowd stares frozen between awe and terror, as if they are witnessing not the death of a man, but the birth of something monstrous. Imagine standing there, your skin prickling with the furnace heat, the stench of burning bronze in your nostrils. You hear the cries, at first human, piercing, desperate. Then, as if the beast itself awakens, the cries warp, bending into grotesque imitation. The sound of an animal, a bull in torment, rumbles through the square. And you realize with a sickness that creeps into your bones that this was the plan all along. This is no accident of design. The creator of this infernal machine intended for pain to be transformed into spectacle, for the agony of flesh to be disguised as the voice of a god's beast. Here cruelty is not hidden. It is exalted, sculpted, made into art. This bull is not just an instrument of death. It is a mirror reflecting the darkest corners of human ambition. What kind of ruler delights in such a thing? What kind of man commissions a device to turn suffering into music? And what of the craftsman, the one who dreamed this horror into being? Did he see it as glory, or only as a means to please his master? Whatever answer you imagine, one truth lingers in the smoke and blood once the bull was forged. No one, not the tyrant, not the artisan, could escape the curse it carried. Tonight we step into the city of Acragas. We will walk the marble streets, pass through the gilded halls, and descend into the shadows where power, paranoia, and invention collide. We will uncover how one man's ambition became his undoing, and how another's cruelty carved his name into the black ledger of history. Stay with me. For this is not just the tale of a machine. It is the tale of men who thought themselves gods, and of the price they paid for daring to make music out of human screams. Before the flames, before the screams, there was a city that glittered with prosperity. Acragas, the jewel of Sicily, rested on a hill above the sea, its walls gleaming white under the Mediterranean sun. Merchants crowded the harbours with ships heavy with grain oil and wine. The streets pulsed with life artisans, hammering bronze into statues of gods' priests chanting before marble altars, nobles feasting in courtyards perfumed with figs and roasted lamb. To walk through Acragas was to believe the city itself had been blessed by Olympus, and at its centre rose Phalaris. To the people he presented himself as protector, a man who promised order amidst rivalries and chaos. He spoke of prosperity, of strength of peace under his rule. He commissioned temples to the gods, theatres for the people, and adorned the city with grandeur that dazzled even foreign visitors. His court glittered with wealth, long tables heavy with golden cups, dancers moving like living flame music, filling vaulted halls. Here, ambition and desire fed like vines climbing toward the sun. But beneath this spectacle of splendour, a different truth coiled in silence. Power in Acragas was never freely given. It was seized, guarded, and defended with blood. The tyrant's gaze never softened. Every smile at his table carried the weight of calculation. The nobles who drank his wine also whispered behind their hands, weighing loyalty against survival. The merchants who traded under his watch counted their profits with one hand and clenched daggers with the other. It was into this world that Perillos entered, a craftsman clever and hungry for recognition. For a man like him, Acragas was both opportunity and snare. Here talent could earn you gold favour even immortality if your work pleased the tyrant. But here too, a single mistake could reduce you to nothing, swallowed by silence or suspicion. And so, life under Phalaris was a gilded cage. To live within it was to enjoy luxury music banquets, the hum of trade and the laughter of slaves carrying wine. But the bars of that cage were strong forged of fear and sharpened by the tyrant's will. Acragas was a paradise that carried within it the shadow of hell, and every man who walked its shining streets knew paradise can vanish in a single breath. This was the stage upon which the story would unfold. A city dressed in gold, a ruler cloaked in power, and an artisan whose ambition would call forth one of the most infamous devices of torment the world would ever know. It began not with thunder, but with whispers. In the marble corridors of Acragas, rumours slithered like smoke a noble had looked too long. At the tyrant's throne, a merchant had withheld tribute. A guard had spoken a careless word. Phalaris listened, always listening, his mind sharpening each whisper into suspicion. He ruled not by trust, but by fear. And fear requires a language, a symbol so terrible that none would dare defy him. Into this atmosphere of unease stepped Perillos the craftsman. Bronze was his gift, and his ambition was fire that never dimmed. He watched as others gained favour with statues, with ornaments, with weapons, and he longed to create something greater, something unforgettable. His skill was undeniable hands that could coax metal into forms both beautiful and strong. But beauty alone did not win the tyrant's heart. What Phalaris craved was power manifested in flesh and metal cruelty given form. So Perillos whispered an idea, a gift unlike any before it, a machine, he said, that would not merely punish, but inspire dread, a hollow beast of bronze shaped like a bull, life-sized and gleaming. Inside a chamber, just large enough to contain a man. Beneath it, a space for fire, and pipes cunningly designed so that the screams of the condemned would emerge twisted, transformed into the bellowing of a furious bull. To Phalaris, the thought was intoxicating. Here was not just execution, here was spectacle, theatre domination. A device that would turn suffering into music, that would break not just the body, but the soul of all who witnessed it. He saw in Perillos's sketches not mere craft, but a tool to bind Acragas in terror. Yet for Perillos, the seed of his invention was not only survival, it was pride. He dreamed of standing before the tyrant as the favoured artisan, the man who had given him something eternal. Did he imagine the horror? Did he foresee the screams echoing through the streets? Perhaps, but ambition blinds more deeply than fire. And so the first lines of the bull were drawn etched onto parchment by trembling hands. With every stroke of ink, Perillos stepped closer to his own undoing. The forge that once gave him gold and glory would soon birth a monster, and from that monster there would be no escape. The seed of doom had been planted. All it required was fire. The day of unveiling came like a festival, though its purpose was darker than any feast or prayer. The bull stood in the courtyard of Phalaris's palace, gleaming in the sunlight, as though a god of bronze had descended to earth. Its flanks shone with a mirror's polish, its horns curved upward like spears. To the crowd it was a marvel art and menace fused into one. To Phalaris it was perfection, a monument to his power, a beast that could devour men and roar with their suffering. Perillos stood beside his creation, pride burning in his chest. He explained its workings, the way the chamber opened, at the side the pipes that coiled like a serpent's tongue within the bull's head. He spoke with the fervour of a man convinced that genius would shield him. He described how the condemned's screams would emerge not as cries of pain, but as the bellow of a mighty bull, an offering to the gods or a warning to the living. Phalaris listened, his lips curled in a smile that revealed nothing. He circled the bronze beast like a predator circling prey. Then, with a voice smooth as oil, yet heavy with command, he asked the question that sealed Perillos' fate, and who artisan will prove this marvel works as promised? The crowd stirred uneasy. Perillos faltered. He had expected praise, perhaps a reward. Certainly not this. But Phalaris' eyes were fixed upon him, unblinking, pitiless. The tyrant's hand swept toward the bull, as if the decision were already made. The trap cunningly designed to devour others had been baited for its very maker. Guards seized Perillos. His protests rang out. He was no criminal. He was the creator. His voice cracked, pleading with the ruler he had sought to please. But the tyrant's will was iron. To Phalaris, there was no irony too cruel to savour, no betrayal too sharp to wield. What better demonstration than to let the architect of torment become its first inhabitant? As the side door of the bull swung open, the truth collapsed upon Perillos like a hammer blow. His invention was no gift. It was a snare, and the first neck in its jaws was his own. The sunlight glinted off the bronze as the hollow chamber yawned open its polished walls, waiting to embrace him. The crowd fell silent, the air thick with dread, as Perillos was dragged toward the mouth of the beast. The trap had sprung. What was once a dream of glory had become a sentence of fire. And in the stillness before the flames, Perillos must have known ambition had forged his chains. The cell was damp, its air heavy with the stench of mildew and iron. Darkness clung to the stones like a second skin, and in that suffocating void, Perillos sat stripped of dignity, stripped of illusion. Hours had passed since he had been dragged from the gleaming bull hours in which the weight of betrayal pressed down upon him until even breathing felt like a confession. The artisan who once dreamed of immortality through creation now tasted only the ashes of despair. He replayed the moment in his mind endlessly, the tyrant's smile, the guard's hands gripping his arms, the hollow echo of the bull's door as it swung open. How could he have been so blind? He had believed that genius was a shield, that Phalaris would see in him a partner, not a pawn. But tyrants do not share power. They consume it. In gifting cruelty to a man who thrived upon fear, Perillos had sealed his fate with his own hands. Loneliness crept into him like frost. No allies came to his defense. No voices rose to question his condemnation. The same nobles who once admired his craft now shrank into silence. Friends turned shadows, family vanished behind fear. In the court of a tyrant, loyalty is a mask worn only until it endangers the wearer. Perillos realized with a bitterness that gnawed at his soul that he was already forgotten, his name reduced to whispers, his fate already decided. And yet worse than abandonment was the waiting. He knew what was to come. He knew the chamber he had built too well, the way the air would thicken, the way the bronze would grow hotter, until it seared flesh from bone. He could see himself inside it, choking, writhing, screaming, as his own design betrayed him. The imagination that had once filled him with pride now turned traitor, conjuring every detail of his future torment until he longed for sleep that would not come. In the darkness, he whispered to himself pleas, prayers, curses. He begged the gods to intervene, to twist fate to grant him mercy, but the silence was unbroken, save for the distant crackle of torches and the drip of unseen water. The gods of Acragas had turned their faces away, and so Perillos descended into a torment more cruel than fire, the slow unravelling of hope. Alone, abandoned, awaiting the furnace of his own creation, he learned what every victim of tyranny comes to know, that there is no justice, no reason, only the cold satisfaction of a ruler who feeds on fear. The bull had been forged in bronze, but its true fire had always been kindled in the heart of its maker. The word trial was whispered, though in Phalaris' court, justice was nothing but theatre draped in solemnity. A platform was raised in the square, the bull gleaming in the background like a silent spectator. Citizens gathered, drawn, not by faith in truth, but by the magnetic pull of spectacle. They came to see how swiftly power could devour one of its own. Perillos was dragged before the assembly, his wrists bound, his eyes hollow with sleepless dread. Once he had stood here as a craftsman, his voice confident as he presented wonders to the tyrant. Now he stood as prey, his words strangled before they even left his mouth. The herald announced the charges: treachery, arrogance, conspiracy against the state. They rang absurd, yet none dared laugh. In Acragas, to mock the tyrant's accusations was to inherit them yourself. Witnesses were called men. Perillos had dined with clients he had once enriched with his skill. Their voices quavered with false conviction as they recited lines fed to them by fear. He sought to deceive the ruler, one said. He meant his device as mockery, another claimed. Each accusation piled upon the last until they crushed the truth beneath their weight. The artisans who once envied him now found safety in condemning him. The nobles who once courted his favor now spat his name like venom. And through it all, Phalaris sat enthroned above the crowd, silent, smiling faintly. His eyes never left Perillos, as though savoring each moment of the man's humiliation. He needed no verdict, no deliberation. The sentence had been written the moment the bull's bronze body cooled in the forge. This charade was not for truth, it was for domination. It was to remind every soul in Acragas that even genius could not outshine fear. When Perillos finally spoke, his voice cracked, his words tumbling from lips dry with terror. He pleaded not innocence. What use was innocence here, but mercy? He reminded Phalaris that he had labored for his glory, that the bull was forged not for rebellion, but for obedience. But the tyrant's expression did not change. To beg was to amuse him nothing more. The herald's final cry rang out across the square. Let the Creator prove his creation. The crowd shuddered, for all knew what it meant. No jury was called, no laws invoked. Justice in Acragas was a mask stretched across cruelty's face. And Perillos saw with agonizing clarity that he was not a man on trial. He was a pawn in a performance staged to enthrone terror itself. The sentence was not justice. It was theatre written in fire. And soon the curtain would rise. The night before his execution was endless. Shadows crawled across the stone walls of his cell, stretching long and thin as the torchlight flickered. Perillos did not sleep. How could he sleep is a mercy, and mercy had long abandoned him. Instead, he sat hunched against the cold wall, listening to the slow rhythm of dripping water, counting each drop as though it were the seconds of his dwindling life. When dawn came, it was not the radiant promise of rebirth, but a cruel reminder of finality. Through a small slit in the wall, he caught the faintest glimpse of sky, the palest blue tinged with pink. For a moment, he let his mind drift to memories of Acragas before the tyrant's shadow, sunlit vineyards, the laughter of children chasing goats in the hills, the hum of hammers from his workshop. He had once believed his hands could build beauty, that bronze could serve the gods and honor the city. Now those same hands had built only a tomb. The guards came at sunrise with his last meal, coarse bread, stale with dryness, and a clay cup of water. No wine, no feast, no dignity. He chewed slowly, not from hunger, but from the desperate need to delay. Each swallow tasted like earth, bitter and final. When the bread was gone, he lingered over the water, sipping it, as though it were sacred nectar. He thought bitterly that this was the last time cool liquid would ever touch his throat. Soon only fire and smoke would claim him. There were no letters to write, no family to whom he could confide his sorrow. Those who once stood close had already turned away. Silence had devoured every tie of friendship, leaving him to walk alone into the abyss. He whispered prayers into the stillness, half to the gods, half to himself. To Apollo, he asked for light. To Hades, he begged for swiftness. To anyone who might listen, he asked for memory, that his name might not vanish with his body. And yet, in the quiet moments, shame weighed even heavier than fear. Was it not his own ambition that had led him here? Had he not forged the very bull that now waited to devour him? He thought of his first sketches of the pride that had swelled in him as he imagined presenting it to Phalaris. He had dreamed of eternal recognition, and now he had achieved it, though in a way more twisted than he ever could have conceived. The footsteps of the guards returned echoing down the corridor like the tolling of a funeral bell. Perillos stood his knees, trembling, his breath shallow. He turned once more toward the thin slice of sky, drank it in as though it were his final vision of freedom. Then the door groaned open and daylight poured in, not as a gift, but as a summons. This was the final sunrise he would ever know. And beyond it, the flames awaited. The square was already alive with anticipation when Perillos was led out, chains rattling with each reluctant step. The bull stood waiting in the center, polished to a golden shine, its massive frame reflecting the sun. To some in the crowd, it looked like a god statue, a sacred beast born of myth. To others, it was a nightmare of metal, a predator with no eyes, no mercy. But to Perillos, it was a mirror, an unflinching reflection of his pride, now twisted into his coffin. The guards dragged him forward, ignoring his trembling legs. A hush fell upon the gathering. No priest recited prayers, no herald read words of honor. There was no dignity in this death. This was not an execution for justice. It was a performance staged for power. Phalaris himself rose from his throne, his voice cold and measured as he proclaimed, "Let the artisan prove his art." The words hung in the air like a curse. The bronze door in the bull's side swung open with a groan, revealing the hollow chamber within. Its polished walls glinted like a furnace already aflame. The crowd pressed closer, morbid curiosity tightening its grip. Perillos struggled, his voice cracking into pleas, mercy, forgiveness, anything. But the guards forced him down, shoving him inside the beast's belly. His hands scraped against the metal already warm from the sun. He tried to push back, but the door slammed shut behind him, sealing him in darkness. For a moment, silence. Then the crackle of kindling. The fire was lit beneath the bull's belly flames, licking upward, feeding on dry wood, until they roared with life. Slowly, inexorably, the bronze grew hotter, its surface glowing faintly red at the seams. Inside, Perillos felt the air thicken, suffocating, searing his lungs. He clawed at the walls, but there was no escape. The chamber that he had designed with such care now turned against him with merciless precision. The first scream burst forth, raw and human, echoing inside the chamber. But then, the pipes in the bull's mouth caught the sound, twisting it, warping it. What emerged was no longer the cry of a man, but the bellow of a beast. The bull roared low, thunderous, unholy. The crowd gasped, some recoiling, others staring in horrified fascination. Children clutched their mothers. Men shifted uneasily, but none spoke. Phalaris leaned forward, his lips curving into a smile. To him this was triumph, agony, transformed into music, cruelty masquerading as art. He watched as the bull shuddered with Perillos's thrashing, as the roars filled the square like the voice of a living monster. The artisan's screams, once sharp and desperate, blended into a haunting chorus that made the air itself tremble. Inside Perillos's body, blistered and burned, each breath scorching his throat, each movement tearing at flesh. He had become both victim and instrument, his pain feeding the tyrant's spectacle. The crowd could do nothing but watch, trapped between revulsion and awe. And as the fire raged, the bull roared again, louder, deeper, until it seemed the earth itself groaned in sympathy. It was not the sound of justice. It was not the sound of gods. It was the sound of human cruelty made eternal. When the fire finally ebbed, the square was cloaked in silence. The bull, once radiant with polished brilliance, now glowed faintly red, its flanks blackened with soot. Thin wisps of smoke curled upward from its nostrils, drifting into the pale sky like offerings the gods would never accept. The monstrous roars had ceased. No sound came from within, only a heavy smothering quiet that settled over the crowd like a shroud. The people stared, eyes wide, faces pale. Some had come thirsting for spectacle, for proof of their ruler's power. Others had come out of fear, compelled by the knowledge that absence would draw suspicion. But all of them, standing before the smouldering bull, felt the same chill creeping through their bones. They had witnessed a man's soul devoured, and in its place had heard a beast cry out. There was no triumph in it, only dread. The guards approached with practiced detachment, though even they averted their eyes. They opened the side door, and a wave of heat rolled outward, carrying with it the stench of scorched flesh and molten bronze. What remained inside was no longer recognizable as the artisan who had once shaped the bull with careful hands. Perillos had been reduced to little more than ash and charred bone clinging to the metal walls like a final signature. The creator had been erased by his creation. Phalaris rose slowly from his throne, surveying the scene. His expression betrayed no sorrow, no satisfaction, only the calm certainty of a man who knew his power had been carved deeper into the marrow of his city. He gestured, and the guards moved swiftly. The remains were dragged away unceremoniously to be discarded like refuse. No burial, no rites, no name carved in stone. For tyrants, mercy is weakness, and memory is dangerous. The crowd began to disperse, their sandals scraping against the stone, their voices hushed. Mothers pulled children close, merchants whispered of leaving the city, and nobles kept their eyes low, unwilling to meet one another's gaze. The bull stood alone in the square, its hollow belly cooling in the breeze. It was a husk now, silent yet alive with menace, a reminder etched in bronze of what disobedience or even ambition could bring. And in that silence lay something more terrible than the roars themselves. For noise can be denied, explained, forgotten. But silence seeps into the bones, lingers in memory, and whispers in the night. The crowd left with silence, clinging to them, a silence that promised they would never escape the shadow of what they had seen. The fire had gone out. The screams had ceased. But Acragas was not cleansed. It was stained indelibly by the quiet horror that follows when cruelty has had its fill. History is a cruel judge, and it remembers not the marble temples nor the golden feasts of Acragas, but the bull. Long after the fires cooled and the bones of Perillos crumbled to dust, the legend of the brazen beast endured. It passed from lips to parchment, from generation to generation, whispered as a warning of what happens when ambition serves tyranny. The name of Phalaris was carved into that story, not as a ruler, not as a builder, but as a butcher who mistook cruelty for power. Yet irony has a long memory, for in time Phalaris himself would taste the same fate he had inflicted. His enemies rose, rebellion swelled, and the tyrant who once commanded men's lives like pieces on a board was dragged down into the dust. The bull, once his instrument of fear, became his executioner. He was thrust into the very chamber he had adored, and as the fire licked its way across the bronze, once more the tyrant's own screams echoed through the pipes. The monster he had cherished devoured its master, and the city of Acragas roared with the sound of justice twisted back upon him. But what lesson do we take from this? Is it that cruelty inevitably turns upon those who wield it? Or is it something darker, that once cruelty is born into the world, it cannot be destroyed, only passed along, staining all who touch it? The bull itself did not die with Phalaris. Legends tell that it travelled seized as war booty carried to other lands, a wandering monument to human imagination, corrupted by violence. Each retelling stokes its flames anew. Each whisper breathes life back into its hollow belly. Think of what it represents: the mind of an artisan, clever enough to transform metal into song. The hunger of a ruler, desperate to bind his people through terror. The silence of bystanders who watched and did nothing as screams turned to roars. The bull is not only a relic of Sicily's past, it is a mirror. It asks us, how often have we built our own brazen beasts? How often have we traded genius for cruelty, invention for domination, silence for safety? The fires of Acragas are long extinguished, but the echoes of the bull still haunt us. For what was the Brazen Bull, if not proof that the human mind, capable of beauty and creation, is also capable of horrors so profound they outlive their makers? And so I leave you with a question, one that lingers like smoke in the lungs. When the next bull is forged, when ambition once again tempts a hand to turn brilliance into suffering, will we recognize it before the fire is lit, or will we, as the people of Acragas did, stand in silence and watch it roar?